The Ukrainian army has taken a very critical step. Ukrainian soldiers have raided the Russian convoy. After this raid, the Ukrainian army gained very important advantages. If the Ukrainian army continues like this, it would completely expel Russian soldiers from Ukrainian territory. After that, when the soldiers in the Russian army began to experience a shortage of supplies and ammunition, Putin did not know what to do. In the last days of the Ukraine-Russia war, the Ukrainian army gained very serious advantages. However, the Ukrainian army began to corner Russian soldiers in the most important areas. The Russian soldiers had no power to stop the Ukrainian army. At the same time, the Ukrainian army had begun to make strategic moves instead of engaging in a heated confrontation with Russian soldiers. These moves of the Ukrainian army have completely cornered the Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army has started preparations to expel Russian soldiers from this area. And the Ukrainian army targeted ammunition, weapons, and tanks. If these strategic moves of the Ukrainian army succeed, the Russian soldiers would be in a position not to take even the slightest step, so that the Ukrainian soldiers could get the victory they deserved. For a long time, the Ukrainian army has been thinking about how it could organize an operation in this region. After the recent events, the first step of the Ukrainian army was to scan the area and conduct reconnaissance. For this, the Ukrainian intelligence network took action. After these discoveries, the Ukrainian army had discovered many headquarters and ammunition routes. And after that, the Ukrainian army moved to deal a big blow to Russia. But there was something wrong with this operation planned by the Ukrainian army. Ukraine first sent flag officers to many regions. However, the foundations of the operation to corner the Russian soldiers were laid. Ukrainian soldiers were aware that Russian air defense systems in the region would cause problems. But Ukraine contacted agents inside the Russian military. Agents of the Russian army informed the Ukrainian army that Russia will send a very large convoy to the Soledar region. At the same time, Putin made a big mistake because he was very stubborn in the Bakhmut region. He sent all the air defense systems in the Soledar region to Bakhmut. After Putin's move, the convoy he sent to Soledar was literally vulnerable. Turning this lack of security into an advantage, the Ukrainian army immediately took action. The operation of the Ukrainian army on this convoy would change the course of the war. When the Ukrainian army learned that Russian soldiers were moving, it began preparations. Ukraine first identified the route and deployed remote-controlled C-4s to this area. After that, the Ukrainian army made a critical move and placed rocket launchers on the slopes in the region. Ukrainian soldiers began to ambush in the area and wait for the Russian army. But a very big problem has arisen, because Russia had taken precautions for this before. The Russian army was checking for any explosives on the ground, with the vehicle located at the front of the convoy. When the Ukrainian army realized this situation, it contacted the center without wasting any time. And the Ukrainian army had a second plan. That's why the HIMARS moved towards the region. The Russian soldiers, who did not expect such a move, were surprised at what to do. The Ukrainian army wasted no time in repeatedly sending missiles at armored vehicles in front of the Russian convoy with HIMARS deck. This attack by Ukraine has cornered Russian soldiers, and all Putin's plans fell through. The Russian army, which wanted to establish superiority in the region, was trying to retreat by necessity, but the Ukrainian army kept attacking without stopping. After the Ukrainian army blew up the armored vehicle at the very rear of the Russian convoy is now an open target, informing the center and sharing the coordinates. Missiles began to be fired into the region in a row with HIMARS from the center. The Ukrainian army literally destroyed the convoy thanks to the HIMARS. Although some Russian soldiers wanted to continue the war by deploying, they were trying to leave the region because of the HIMARS. With this successful operation, the Ukrainian army began to clear Russian soldiers from the region. But the Ukrainian army had neglected one thing. Since the signal jammers were not activated, it was only a matter of time before the Russian soldiers returned to the region. On top of this, The Ukrainian army detected the convoy in which the explosives were concentrated and placed the explosives in their possession in this convoy, and the Ukrainian army left the region after setting their timer to launch a major coup against Russia. So the Russian soldiers were faced with a surprise they never expected. Russian soldiers encountered a large explosion because Ukrainian soldiers placed the timer bombs they had in the right place, and the Russian military somehow started looking for Ukrainian soldiers on the news that Ukraine had left the region. In the Ukrainian army, which returned to Kiev, a celebratory mood prevailed, because Russia, which was already experiencing ammunition problems, would fall into a very difficult situation after this operation. But after the Russian army learned about the latest developments, a very big problem arose. After Putin found out about this defeat, he went berserk with anger, and Putin moved to organize a new operation. But the soldiers in the Russian army did not want this. At the same time, a very large part of the soldiers in the Russian army were young people who had been forced to participate in the war and had no experience. However, because Putin could not see this situation, he was still trying to organize larger operations and was suffering major defeats. These advantages obtained by the Ukrainian army, on the other hand, cornered the Russian soldiers. That is why Russian soldiers no longer wanted to fight and tried to surrender and flee at the slightest opportunity. Putin, who was aware of this, would start making very harsh interventions. But Russian soldiers did not know what they would face when they fled the war. In recent days, the Ukrainian army has achieved a very serious superiority, and now the whole world was accepting this superiority. But when they noticed this situation in the Russian soldiers, they no longer wanted to fight and die, thinking that they were fighting in vain. That is why the number of deserters in Russian soldiers was increasing a little more every day. Thus, the Ukrainian army had completely turned the war in its favor. However, the Ukrainian army decided to set up a phone line for Russian soldiers. This teleoperation organized by Ukraine has caused a great echo in the world. The phone line created by Ukraine has been registered under the name I Want to Live. Thanks to this telephone line, Russian soldiers who did not want to fight would call this line and surrender directly without being harmed at all in the war. This line attracted a lot of attention, and Russian soldiers repeatedly searched for this line. However, the confusion in the Russian army began to increase more and more. If it continues like this, the Ukrainian army would start making moves to end the war. However, if the incoming calls on this line continue in this way, there would be no soldiers left in the Russian army. After these recent developments, the comments made by war analysts have resonated all over the world. According to the comments of war analysts, the Ukrainian army had gained the upper hand in many areas. At the same time, the Ukrainian army, which has gained the upper hand psychologically, has cornered the Russian soldiers. Unable to meet even the most basic needs, soldiers in the Russian army began to collapse mentally after their defeats. Thus, even the slightest move made by the Ukrainian army began to cause great damage to the Russian army. If the Ukrainian army continues to use the advantages it has gained correctly, it would become a matter of time before it wins the war. It was the first time Ukraine had come so close to a deserved victory. If Putin does not change his policies as soon as possible, his political career and power will come to an end. Putin was constantly organizing operations because he was aware of this, but for a long time, Putin had not achieved any success. It is a matter of curiosity how Putin will follow the path from now on.